Welcome to TRN Podcast, episode 118.
Great to be here.
Today we're taking a closer look at the life and legacy of Mario Vargas Llosa, the Nobel Prize laureate who recently passed away.
Yes, a towering figure in literature. And for our conversation today, we've gathered some interesting sources. We've got a detailed obituary from BBC News Mondo, a report from HLA magazine covering his final days, and another piece from HLA which actually details his relationship with Isabel Preysler.
Right, so the idea is to kind of synthesize these different accounts, to give our listeners a really comprehensive understanding of this literary giant.
Exactly, from his early aspirations right through to his final moments. And we'll touch on some of the complexities of his personal life, too, as revealed in these sources.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe his early life, the influences that shaped him. He was born in Arequipa, Peru, March 28th, 1936.
That's right. But interestingly, his very early childhood was spent in Bolivia. He actually described it as a kind of paradise, living with his mother's family.
A paradise. That's quite a word.
It seems so. But then came a pivotal moment. He discovered his father, who he believed dead, was actually alive.
Wow. That must have been huge.
Absolutely. And it became the starting point for his autobiography, El Pez en el Agua, A Fish in the Water. It clearly marked a major turning point.
I can imagine. And then the family moved back to Peru, to Lima, which he didn't like initially, I read.
No, apparently not. He found refuge in adventure novels, sort of escaping the reality he disliked.
And then came the Leoncio Prado military school experience. That seems crucial.
Definitely. It was against his father's wishes, which is significant in itself. But going there, despite his father, seemed to solidify his desire to become a writer.
Kind of a defiant act that fueled his ambition.
Precisely. And of course, that whole experience became the raw material for his explosive first novel, La Ciudad y los Perros, The City and the Dogs, or The Time of the Hero.
Right, so that difficult experience directly fed his art. What about his intellectual influences back then?
Well, it was a real mix. You see figures like Sartre, Marx, the Peruvian thinker Mariátegui, but also literary giants like Faulkner. A really broad spectrum.
And on a personal level, there was his rather unconventional early marriage to his aunt, Julia Orchidi.
Yes, which he later fictionalized, quite humorously actually, in La Tía Julia y el Escribidor, and Julia and the Scriptwriter.
Which brings us neatly to his literary career and that whole Latin American boom phenomenon.
An absolutely incredible period, and his output was just staggering.
It really was. What are we talking? 20 novels?
20 novels, a book of short stories, 10 plays, 14 essay collections, 2 chronicles, and that memoir we mentioned. Just prolific.
When you list it like that, and some key works we should probably highlight. Obviously, The City and the Dogs.
Absolutely, a debut. Then maybe Conversation in the Cathedral, known for its complexity, and Julia, which we just mentioned.
The War of the End of the World, his big historical novel.
And The Feast of the Goat, tackling the Trujillo dictatorship. Each one showcasing a different side of his talent.
The City and the Dogs, that really launched him internationally, didn't it? But it caused quite a stir back home.
Oh, huge backlash. The authorities at the Leoncio Prado School actually held a public burning of the book.
Burning copies. Wow. Shows the power it had right from the start.
Definitely hit a nerve. And interestingly, in those early days, he was actually a supporter of the Cuban Revolution.
Right, which is fascinating given his later political evolution.
It is. And he was, of course, right in the thick of that boom generation. Close relationships with Garcia Marquez, Julio Cortázar, Carlos Fuentes.
The titans of the era.
Indeed. Though his friendship with Garcia Marquez famously imploded.
Ah, yes, the infamous punch in Mexico City. What was that really about? The sources are a bit vague, aren't they?
They are. Rumors swirl, personal disputes, maybe political differences intensifying. It remains one of those literary world legends.
But it shows the intensity of those relationships. And Vargas Llosa himself kept evolving as a writer, didn't he? He went through different phases, comedic, historical.
Even erotic novels later on. He never stood still creatively.
Let's talk about that political evolution then, from supporting Cuba to, well, a very different place.
A really marked shift towards liberalism. He cited thinkers like Isaiah Berlin and Karl Popper as key influences in that change.
And it wasn't just theoretical. He got actively involved in Peruvian politics.
Very actively. His public opposition to the government's plan to nationalize banks in Peru was a major turning point. It propelled him into frontline politics.
Leading to his run for president in 1990.
Exactly. A huge step for a writer. He campaigned vigorously on a liberal platform.
And he lost to Alberto Fujimori.
He did. And that defeat seemed to really disillusion him with the idea of direct political involvement. He stepped back after that.
It's interesting, though. His political stance wasn't easily pigeonholed, was it? Liberal on economics, but sources say he held quite progressive views on social issues.
That's right. Reports mentioned his support for things like gay marriage, abortion rights, euthanasia positions, maybe not always aligned with traditional liberal economic stances. It shows a certain complexity in his thinking.
Okay, moving towards his later life, his personal relationships also had some dramatic turns. His long marriage to Patricia Llosa, the mother of his children.
Yes, they were married for decades. But then, quite suddenly, in 2015, came the relationship with Isabel Preysler.
That was a surprise. Preysler being a very high-profile socialite figure in Spain, it seemed like a very different world for him.
It certainly generated enormous media attention. They became a real celebrity couple, constantly in the public eye.
A stark contrast to the usually more private life of a serious novelist.
Absolutely. That relationship lasted nearly 8 years, but they eventually separated in late 2022.
And what did the sources say about that period or the aftermath? I gather his children weren't thrilled about the Preysler relationship.
The HOA reports suggest his children perhaps preferred his life with their mother, Patricia. And indeed, after the split with Preysler, there was a reconciliation with Patricia Llosa.
So a return to his family roots in his final years.
It appears that way. The reports describe him spending his last years closer to Patricia and their children.
Let's talk about those final days. His health was declining, wasn't it?
Yes, in his final years, his health became more fragile, though he did manage to celebrate his 89th birthday earlier this year.
That's good. And the sources mention his family was very involved towards the end.
Very much so, it seems. HLA reports that they took him to places significant to his literary life, perhaps trying to connect him with those memories.
That's quite touching.
And he apparently continued to enjoy classical music, a lifelong passion.
Did he keep writing right up until the end?
His last published piece of writing seems to have been a prologue for a new book by an Argentinian writer friend, Alejandro Guillermo Romers.
And then he passed away peacefully.
Yes. On Sunday, April 13th, 2025, in Lima, surrounded by his family, according to the reports.
And his wishes for afterwards.
He wished to be cremated, and the farewell was kept private just for the family. He once said he wanted to die while writing.
A writer's wish.
Indeed. While that didn't happen literally, his life was certainly dedicated to literature until the very end.
There was also that significant honor near the end, his induction into the French Académie in 2022.
Quite remarkable, yes. A rare distinction for a writer whose primary language wasn't French. It spoke volumes about his international stature.
And he did signal an end to his novel writing, didn't he?
He did. He announced that his 2023 novel, Te dedico mi silencio, I dedicate my silence to you, would be his last. He also stopped writing his long-running weekly newspaper column around that time.
So looking back, what's his legacy? He's often called the last sacred monster of Latin American literature.
It feels appropriate, doesn't it? His body of work is just immense, incredibly influential. He tackled huge themes: power, society, history, love, politics.
And he remains one of only 2 Nobel laureates to emerge directly from that Latin American boom generation.
Which really underscores the significance of that whole literary movement and his central place within it.
So, Mario Vargas Llosa. Clearly a life packed with literary dedication, quite intense political engagement, and, well, some complex personal relationships, too.
Definitely. From that turbulent childhood, through global literary fame, the surprising foray into presidential politics, even that late chapter in the celebrity spotlight. His story is just fascinating. It shows the passions, maybe even the contradictions of a truly major figure.
And his work endures. Those novels, essays, they still offer such profound insights into Latin American life, politics, and just the human condition generally.
Absolutely. We hope this exploration today has given our listeners maybe a richer feel for his life and work. Perhaps it encourages people to dive into his novels or revisit them.
Definitely. You know, what aspects of his journey resonate most? Or what questions still linger? It might be interesting for listeners to perhaps pick up one of his major works or even read more about that whole boom era to get more context. Food for thought, certainly.